It all began with a letter, a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with red wax and no return address. I found it on my doorstep one evening after coming back from a long shift at the hospital. The city was already dark, the streetlights flickering as the autumn wind howled through the narrow alleys. The envelope had my name on it, in a calligraphy so elegant and archaic that I almost didn't want to open it. I wish I hadn't. Inside was a single sheet of parchment. It read, "You have been chosen. For years, your dedication to science has been noted. But there are things beyond the grasp of medicine and reason, things we can offer you, things you cannot unsee. Join us. We can show you truths hidden from the eyes of common men. Meet us. You know where." I stared at the paper, feeling a chill settle over my bones. There was no signature, no clue as to who had sent it. But there was a part of me, deep in the recesses of my mind, that did know where. My hands trembled as I gripped the letter tighter. A memory I hadn't thought about in years flickered at the edge of my consciousness. An old, abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town, deep in the woods. It had been empty for decades, a place we used to dare each other to explore as kids. It had been our childhood haunted house, a place of fear and fascination. The mansion hadn't crossed my mind in years. Until now. I couldn't explain why, but something was pulling me there. An invisible thread wrapping tighter with each passing second. I tossed the letter aside, but the words were branded in my brain. The next night, I found myself at the edge of the woods, staring up at the looming silhouette of the mansion. It was worse than I remembered, more decayed, the windows shattered and vines crawling up the cracked stone walls. The air around it felt wrong, too still, too cold for the season. I told myself to turn back, that this was madness, but my feet carried me forward, deeper into the overgrown path that led to the front door. I wasn't prepared for what I would find inside. No one could be. The front door creaked open with the slightest push, as if it had been waiting for me. The scent of mold and rot hit me like a wave, but underneath there was something else. Something metallic like the tang of blood. My stomach churned, but I stepped inside. The foyer was vast, with ceilings that soared impossibly high, lined with faded portraits of people whose eyes seemed to follow me as I walked. Dust blanketed everything, except for a single trail of footsteps leading up the grand staircase. The footsteps weren't mine. I hesitated at the bottom of the stairs, my hand resting on the decaying wooden banister. There was a sound, faint at first like whispering, low and indistinct. The voices seemed to come from the upper floors, swirling around in the stale air. My skin prickled as I strained to make out the words. I took a step forward. "Sir, you shouldn't be here." The voice was clear now, close, too close, but there was no one in sight. I froze, heart pounding. My pulse echoed in my ears, drowning out the whispers, but the voice continued, persistent. "Sir, leave while you still can. But I didn't leave. Couldn't. The stairs groaned under my weight as I ascended, following the footprints deeper into the mansion's decaying interior. Every step felt heavier than the last, as though the house itself was resisting my presence. As I reached the second floor, I noticed something odd. The walls were covered in strange, intricate carvings, symbols and figures I didn't recognize. They seemed ancient, unnatural, as though they had been etched into the very bones of the house. At the end of the hallway was a single door, slightly ajar, a soft glow spilling out from within. I knew I shouldn't open it. I knew nothing good could come from what lay beyond. But I reached out, hand trembling, and pushed it open. The room was small, stark in contrast to the rest of the mansion, and completely empty save for one thing. A circle drawn on the floor in thick, dried blood. Symbols, identical to the ones on the walls, were scrawled around its edge. In the center of the circle was a single, ornate chair, and on that chair sat someone. No, not someone. Something. It looked human at first glance, but the longer I stared, the more wrong it became. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, the veins underneath pulsing with a sickly glow. Its eyes were black, like pits leading into some unfathomable void, and its mouth twisted into a smile that didn't reach those terrible eyes. Sir, we've been waiting for you. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. The thing in the chair rose slowly, its movements unnervingly fluid. Sir, you came. Sir, it said, its voice a low rasp that seemed to vibrate in the air around me. Sir, we knew you would. I backed away, but the door behind me slammed shut with a deafening bang. The thing stepped forward, its smile widening. Sir, now, the real lesson begins. I don't know how long I was in that house. Time lost all meaning the moment that door shut. The creature spoke of knowledge, of ancient rites and secrets that had been lost to humanity for centuries. It offered me power, things beyond my wildest imagination. But there was a price, and as the hours dragged on, I realized that I had already begun to pay it. Every question I asked, every piece of information it revealed, seemed to strip away a part of me. My memories blurred, my sense of self eroding with each word. I could feel something else taking root inside me, something dark and insidious. I wanted to leave, but there was no escape. Not anymore. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. I found myself outside the mansion, standing in the middle of the overgrown path, the morning sun rising in the distance. My clothes were soaked in blood, my own or someone else's, I couldn't tell. The whispers were gone, but their echo remained, a constant, nagging presence in the back of my mind. I ran until I couldn't breathe, until my legs gave out and I collapsed on the pavement, gasping for air. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching me, that something had followed me out of that house. I never went back to the mansion, but the invitation still haunts me, and sometimes, in the dead of night, I can still hear the whispers. We're waiting. The nightmares started the night after I left the mansion. At first, they seemed like ordinary dreams, disjointed fragments of strange places, distorted faces, and voices that murmured just beyond the edge of understanding. But each night they grew worse, darker, more real, and always, without fail, they would end the same way. With me standing in front of the mansion, the front door slowly creaking open as that thing inside whispered my name. I began to dread sleep. The moment I closed my eyes, I'd feel its presence, its gaze, fixed on me even from miles away. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself it was stress or my overactive imagination. But deep down, I knew that something had followed me out of that house. It wasn't until I saw the shadow that I realized how much worse things were going to get. A week had passed since I first visited the mansion, and I was barely holding it together. My coworkers noticed. My friends asked if I was okay. I lied, told them I was just tired. But it was more than that. I felt drained, as though something was slowly siphoning away my life force. I started seeing things in the corners of my vision, dark figures that would disappear when I turned to look at them, At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, until one night, I realized it wasn't. It was around midnight. I was sitting in my apartment, staring at the blank TV screen, too afraid to sleep. The apartment was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. And then, in the dim light of the room, I saw it. A shadow, darker than any I had ever seen, was standing in the hallway. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, some illusion cast by the flickering streetlights outside. But it didn't move. It stood there, motionless, the shape vaguely human but wrong in ways I couldn't describe. My heart thudded in my chest, my pulse roaring in my ears. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but it didn't go away. If anything, it seemed to solidify, becoming more tangible, more real. I should have run. I should have bolted out of the apartment and never looked back. But I was frozen, paralyzed by the cold, creeping fear that wrapped itself around me like a vice. The shadow tilted its head, as though it were studying me. And then, without a sound, it took a step forward. That broke the spell. I scrambled out of my chair, nearly tripping over the coffee table as I backed away. My eyes were locked on the shadow as it moved toward me, slow and deliberate. I could feel something emanating from it, a cold, suffocating dread that made my skin crawl. Underscore, this isn't real. Underscore, I whispered to myself. Underscore, it's just a dream. It's not real. Underscore, but deep down I knew it was. The shadow was real, and it was coming for me. I backed into the kitchen, my hand fumbling for something, anything, to defend myself. My fingers closed around a knife. I gripped it tightly, my knuckles white, though I had no idea what good it would do against something like this. The shadow stopped just at the threshold of the kitchen. It seemed to shimmer for a moment, the edges of its form rippling like smoke. And then, slowly, its head turned, its gaze fixed on something behind me. I whirled around, expecting to see another figure, another nightmare come to life. But there was nothing there, just the empty kitchen, bathed in the faint glow of the streetlights. When I turned back, the shadow was gone. I stood there, knife still clutched in my hand, shaking uncontrollably. My heart pounded against my ribs, my breath coming in shallow gasps. For a long moment, I didn't move, didn't dare breathe, waiting for the shadow to return. But the apartment was still, empty, almost too quiet. It didn't feel like a victory. I knew it would be back. The next morning, I woke up on the floor of the kitchen, the knife still in my hand. My body ached, and my mind was clouded with exhaustion. I had barely slept, but there was no time to rest. I had to figure out what was happening to me, why this thing, this shadow, was haunting me. I went to the library, desperate to find something, anything, that could explain what was going on. I combed through old folklore books, stories about hauntings, possessions, cursed objects, anything that might give me a clue. But nothing seemed to fit. The more I read, the more hopeless it all felt. It wasn't until I found a dusty, old tome tucked away in the far corner of the library that I began to understand the depth of the horror I had stumbled into. The book had no title, no author listed. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded in places, but the symbols, the same ones I had seen carved into the walls of the mansion, were there, scrawled in the margins, intertwined with the text. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages, my breath catching in my throat. There were stories in that book, tales of ancient rites and rituals, dark gods that fed on fear and despair. But what caught my attention was a passage near the end, written in a script so fine I could barely make it out. Underscore, to gaze into the abyss is to invite it in. Once the door is opened, it cannot be closed. It will follow, it will consume, until nothing remains but the shadow of what once was. Underscore. My heart sank as the words sank in. I had opened a door, and now something was following me. Something far worse than a mere shadow. That night, the shadow returned. I could feel it before I saw it. A coldness that seeped into the air, into my bones. This time, it didn't linger in the hallway. It moved with purpose, gliding silently through the apartment, coming closer, always closer. I tried to run, but no matter where I went, the shadow was there, waiting for me. It didn't need to chase me. It was already inside my mind. I could feel it, coiling around my thoughts, whispering things I didn't want to hear. Underscore, you can't escape. Underscore, it said, its voice soft and insidious, like silk brushing against my skin. Underscore, you invited me in. Underscore. I locked myself in the bathroom, the door rattling as the shadow pressed against it. The light flickered, dimming with each passing second. I could feel its presence on the other side, like a weight pressing down on my chest. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. Underscore, there is no escape. Underscore. And then, in the flickering light, I saw something written in the fogged mirror. 3 words, scrawled in dripping red. Underscore, we're waiting still. Underscore. My blood ran cold. I staggered back, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was nowhere to run. The shadow was everywhere, its presence suffocating, relentless. I had opened the door. I had let it in, and now there was no turning back. The mirror message burned in my mind long after it faded into the steam, but the shadow didn't break through the door that night. It lingered, its presence almost taunting me, as though it knew I was close to breaking. Hours passed in agonizing silence, and eventually, the coldness receded, leaving me alone in the bathroom with nothing but the sound of my ragged breathing. I didn't sleep that night, couldn't. Instead, I sat on the cold tile floor, staring at the bathroom door, half expecting it to burst open at any moment. But dawn came, and with it, a strange, uneasy calm. I thought, no, hoped that maybe the worst was over. It wasn't. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and exhaustion. I barely left my apartment. Every noise, every flicker of movement in the shadows sent my heart racing, convinced that the shadow had come back for me. But each time I turned to face it, there was nothing. The apartment felt like a prison, its walls closing in on me. I couldn't focus. My thoughts scattered like leaves in the wind, blown apart by a constant, creeping fear. It wasn't until I noticed the mark that I realized just how deeply the thing had sunk its claws into me. I was in the shower, trying to wash away the grime and sweat of days spent sleepless and terrified, when I saw it, a dark, jagged symbol etched into the skin of my forearm. At first, I thought it was a bruise, but as I ran my fingers over it, the skin felt wrong. The mark wasn't just on the surface. It was inside me, woven into the flesh like a brand. It looked almost like one of the symbols from the mansion, but it was distorted, twisted in a way that made my stomach churn. I scrubbed at it furiously, my mind racing, but the mark wouldn't fade. If anything, it seemed to grow darker, more pronounced with each passing second. A cold panic gripped me as I stared at it. It was a sign, a reminder that the shadow wasn't done with me yet. And then, as if in response to my fear, the whispers began again. Underscore, you're almost ready. Undersir. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The voice was clearer now, more distinct than it had ever been. It wasn't just in my mind, it was coming from somewhere else, somewhere close. I stumbled out of the shower, barely managing to pull on clothes as the voice continued, low and insistent. Underscore, you open the door. Now, finish it. Underscore. The words sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't know what it meant, but the implication was clear. The shadow wasn't just following me. It was waiting for something I had to do. I couldn't stay in the apartment anymore. The walls felt too close, the air too thick with that terrible presence. I grabbed my coat, stuffed a few essentials into a bag, and left. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to move, to get away from the feeling that something was watching me from every corner. The city was bustling, full of life, but I felt completely detached from it. People passed by, unaware of the darkness that followed me, of the mark that throbbed on my arm like a curse. I walked for hours, aimless, my feet carrying me through familiar streets that felt alien now. Everywhere I went, the whispers followed, growing louder, more insistent. It wasn't until I found myself on the outskirts of town, at the edge of the woods, that I realized where I was going. The mansion. It loomed before me again, more decayed than before, if that were even possible. The windows were dark, the once grand facade crumbling, swallowed by the creeping vines and the weight of years. But there was something different about it this time. The air around it felt alive, as though the house itself was breathing, waiting for me to cross the threshold. My mind screamed at me to turn back, but my body moved of its own accord. I couldn't stop myself. The pull was too strong now, and the whispers had become a deafening roar in my ears. Underscore, finish it. Underscore. The front door was already open when I reached it, just as it had been before. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The house seemed to exhale as I crossed the threshold, the air around me heavy with the scent of decay and something far worse. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly in the dim light, pulsing like veins beneath the skin of the house. I knew where I had to go, upstairs, to the room with the circle. The footsteps that had once been so foreign were now my own, leading me back to the room where I had first seen that thing in the chair. My hand hovered over the door handle, my pulse racing, but there was no hesitation this time. I pushed it open. The room was exactly as I remembered it, though the air felt thicker, oppressive. The circle on the floor had grown darker, the symbols around it more intricate, more sinister. But the chair was empty. Underscore. The voice was everywhere now, wrapping around me like a suffocating embrace. I stepped forward, drawn toward the center of the room. The mark on my arm burned, the pain radiating through my entire body. I didn't want to sit. I didn't want to be part of whatever ritual had been set in motion. But I couldn't resist. As I lowered myself into the chair, the floor beneath me seemed to shift, the symbols writhing like living things. The air grew colder, and the whispers intensified, a cacophony of voices all saying the same thing. Underscore, you open the door. Now you must let us through. Underscore. My heart raced as the truth hit me with a sickening clarity. This wasn't just about me. It had never been about me. I had opened a door, not just to the shadow, but to something far worse. Something ancient, something hungry. The mark on my arm pulsed, and the room began to darken, the shadows in the corners creeping closer. I tried to stand, to leave, but I was trapped. The chair held me in place, the symbols on the floor glowing brighter, feeding on the fear that surged through me. And then, in the blackness, I saw them. Figures, dozens of them, their bodies twisted and malformed, their eyes empty pits of darkness. They crawled from the shadows, their limbs moving in unnatural, jerking motions. They were the same as the thing I had seen before, the thing that had waited for me. But now there were more, so many more. Underscore, you brought us here. Underscore, the voices said, in perfect unison. Underscore, and now we will take what you promised. Underscore, I screamed, my voice lost in the growing darkness. The figures surged forward, their cold hands grasping at me, pulling me down into the void that had been waiting since the moment I first stepped into the mansion. And as the shadows closed in, the last thing I heard was the voice, clearer than ever before. Underscore, you were always one of us. Underscore, I don't know how long I've been here. Days? Weeks? Time doesn't exist in the place they've taken me. The shadows are everywhere, always whispering, always watching. They're inside me now, twisting my thoughts, changing me in ways I don't understand. I'm not the same. I don't think I'm even human anymore. The mark on my arm has spread, consuming my skin, my flesh. It pulses with a life of its own, a reminder of the deal I made, the door I opened. And now I wait, just like they waited for me, because I know this isn't the end. Not for me, and not for anyone else who dares to follow the invitation. I don't remember how I got out. One moment, the shadows had dragged me down, their cold, clawed hands tearing at my skin, pulling me into the void. The next, I was lying on my back, gasping for air, the morning sun blinding me. I was outside the mansion again, sprawled on the overgrown path. My clothes were torn, my skin cold and clammy, but I was alive. It didn't make sense. I had been lost, consumed by the darkness. I had felt the life draining from me as the shadows wrapped around my body, pulling me deeper into whatever nightmare world they came from. But now I was back, and the mansion, looming behind me, was silent, empty. I staggered to my feet, my body aching as though I had been through some kind of hellish ordeal. My mind was a haze, the events of the night before slipping through my grasp like sand. The whispers were gone. The suffocating presence that had followed me for days seemed to have vanished. But I knew better than to believe it was over. I looked down at my arm, expecting to see the twisted mark still burned into my flesh. But it was gone. The skin was smooth, unblemished. I ran my fingers over it, half convinced that I had imagined the whole thing. But the memory of the shadow's touch, the cold, creeping fear, was all too real. I turned back to the mansion, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to go back inside. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to never return to this cursed place. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that whatever had happened in that room, in that chair, wasn't over yet. I spent the next few days trying to piece together what had happened. I returned to the library, poring over the strange, ancient texts I had found before, searching for answers. But nothing made sense. The symbols, the shadow, the twisted figures, they didn't fit into any story, any myth I could find. The nightmares returned, worse than before. Every night, I dreamed of the shadows, of the twisted figures crawling out of the dark, reaching for me. But there was something new, something that hadn't been there before. A voice, not the same whispers that had haunted me before, but a voice that was different, familiar, my own. Underscore, it's not over. You brought them. Now you have to finish it. Underscore. Each time I woke, drenched in sweat, the same realization gnawed at my mind. I hadn't escaped. Not really. Something had come back with me. A week passed before I noticed the people. Started small. A man, standing on the corner of my street, watching me from across the road. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared, his eyes blank, as though he were waiting for something. At first, I thought he was just a stranger, a random passerby, but he was always there. Every morning, every night, standing in the same spot, watching. Then there were more. A woman, sitting at the bus stop, her eyes following me as I walked past. A child, standing in the playground, not moving, just staring. Everywhere I went, they were there. People scattered throughout the city, their faces blank, their eyes dark and empty. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that the trauma of the mansion had left me paranoid, seeing things that weren't there. But it became impossible to ignore. They weren't people, not anymore. They were them, the shadows, wearing the faces of strangers, following me everywhere I went. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The fear was gnawing at me from the inside, eating away at my sanity. And then one night I heard the knock. It was just past midnight. I had been sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall, too afraid to close my eyes, when the sound came, a slow, deliberate knock on my apartment door. I froze. I hadn't heard anyone approach. The hallway outside was silent. The only sound, the faint buzz of the building's old electrical wiring. But the knock came again, louder this time. I didn't want to open it. Every part of me screamed not to, but I had to know. I had to see. I crossed the room, my heart in my throat, and opened the door. Standing in the hallway was me. My reflection stared back at me. Same clothes, same face, same hollow, empty eyes. It smiled, a twisted, unnatural smile that made my stomach churn. Underscore, it's time. Underscore, my voice said, but the words didn't match the movement of its lips. Underscore, you can't run anymore. Underscore. Before I could react, the figure stepped forward, pushing me back into the apartment. I stumbled, my legs giving way beneath me as the door slammed shut behind it. My doppelganger loomed over me, its eyes dark as the void itself. Underscore, you opened the door. Underscore, it said, kneeling down to my level. Underscore, now we are one. Underscore. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was dry, my body frozen as if the air around me had solidified. The figure leaned in closer, its breath cold against my skin. Underscore, there was never a shadow. Underscore, it whispered, its voice a perfect mirror of my own. Underscore, you were always the one bringing us in. You were always one of us. Underscore, it smiled again, but this time, I saw what was beneath. The swirling, inky darkness, the endless void of the shadows, staring back at me from behind its eyes. Underscore, you invited us, and now we're here to stay. Underscore, I gasped, choking on my breath, but it didn't move. Its hand reached out, brushing against my arm, and I felt the mark return, burning, searing, spreading like wildfire across my skin. And then I understood. I wasn't a victim. I had never been a victim. The ritual, the mansion, it hadn't been about summoning something from the darkness. It had been about bringing me back. I had opened the door because I was always meant to. I had called them, long before I had ever set foot in that cursed house. They had been waiting for me. I wasn't running from the shadows. I was the shadow. I don't know how much time has passed since that night. days, weeks, maybe even months. It doesn't matter anymore. The fear is gone. The whispers are gone. The world is quiet now, because I'm not alone. They're with me always, and I can feel them growing stronger, feeding on the darkness inside me, waiting for the moment when I will be ready to step into the shadows completely. I don't resist it anymore. I don't fight it. There's no point. This is what I was always meant to become. And when the time comes, when I'm ready, I'll go back to the mansion. I'll finish what I started. And when I do, I'll open the door for others. You see, it was never about me. It's about you. After all, you're still reading, aren't you? You've already opened the door. And now we're waiting for you.